Fast and the Furious franchise, an incredibly successful franchise. It's the highest grossing franchise for Universal Pictures. And this is now the 10th installment, which is kind of hard to fathom. It's kind of hard to believe.
Hmm.
But a few years ago, we actually reviewed F9 on this podcast after they had been sort of off for a few years just due to some setbacks with scheduling, due to the COVID lockdown. That movie had gotten pushed back quite a bit. And there was also, between The Fate of the Furious and F9, the release of the spinoff film Hobbs and Shaw, and so they wanted to spread out these releases. F9 is a movie that we saw and didn't really care for, I would say, to put it
Hmm.
mildly. But we know that coming into Fast X, this is starting to wind down the franchise. This is apparently supposed to be the first chapter to conclude the saga of the Fast and Furious films. Now, some things have come out and developed since then that might throw a wrench in those plans and maybe extend this out a little bit longer. But I think coming into this, we were certainly curious to see how are they going to wrap up this saga of films over the course that's taken place over the course of the past 20 some odd years. Also, Justin Lin, who's been well established with the franchise and has directed like 4 or 5 installments, probably the most well-known associated director with Fast and Furious movies, had been brought on to sort of close out this saga, but in the first month of production, actually left. He left production,
Mm.
apparently due to some creative differences and disagreements with the star Vin Diesel, also a producer on these movies. And then they brought in Louis Leterrier, who is a veteran action filmmaker, has made films like The Incredible Hulk. He's also worked with Jason Statham before on the Transporter films. So definitely a seasoned hand to come on and sort of steer this shit over the finish line. And so with all of that context and sort of background information out the way, I do want to pass it to you to get your opening thoughts and sort of immediate reaction to everything that we saw at Fast X a few weeks ago.
Man, first and foremost, I can't believe we're here at Fast X. We have gotten so far into this movie franchise that the we are using the Roman numeral of 10. Like, it is actually the craziest thing ever to me. But what I will say about this movie, man, it's better than Fast Nine. Again, we left the theater Fast Nine. We were like, yeah, I don't know about that one. At least this one, I think understands where it's going a little bit better in terms of the silliness we have entered into this franchise. I think it gets it a little bit better than Fast Nine got it, and I think they leaned into that a little bit. And I think for that, it did earn a couple more points for me in that direction, man. Not only that, but I think also expecting ridiculousness of action going into these movies is just it just is what it is now. So you're like, okay, what is the thing that they are going to do in these movies? And I think, a lot of it is fine. Some of the action is fine, but that has been kind of the most ridiculous part of these movies recently is the action. There's again, this is in the trailer, but there's like a giant ball running through a city that could blow up at any moment. And there is Vin Diesel crashing helicopters. Again, this is in the trailer with his car. Like, it's just the craziest things that you see in this film. And I think it's so weird though, because often I think that's what takes away from the movie sometimes is too much going on. And that seems to be the case with this movie as well, though it's kind of expected. What I do like about this film, I like the moments we have with our characters kind of get split up in this movie. Small spoiler alert, I guess. Our characters kind of get split up in this movie, and there are characters that I think we like to see together, and they spend have to are forced to spend time together, and I like that part of the movie. There's another part of the movie that's just Vin Diesel being Vin Diesel. He's just being Dominic Toretto throughout the entire film, and that part of the movie is just okay to me, because it includes the more corny parts of the film, and I think the corniness is what takes me away. It's not actually the ridiculousness as much as the corniness. That's like, oh my God, I rolled my eyes like 10 times throughout the movie because they kept giving us these corny lines. And the first time you're like, okay, that's funny. We get it. But then by the fifth or sixth time, you're like, all right, now, like, we understand you don't have to keep doing this. They keep nailing it, and you don't have to keep nailing it. And I think that can be a little bit frustrating of when you're watching that corniness. Jason Momoa is having a blast in this movie. I absolutely love what he's doing here. We don't get to see him, I think, in these positions too often, where he just gets to play like this villain who's super eccentric, super flamboyant, super, you know what I mean? He's just having fun in the role. And I think a lot of the villains in these past Fast movies haven't felt like this. They haven't felt dynamic enough for me to go, oh, this is fun. And Jason Momoa made the movie fun for me in a lot of different moments. And because he was having so much fun, I was having fun. And so I like that a lot actually about the movie. I was like, okay, I like these Jason Momoa moments, but again, the corniness of Vin Diesel being in the same frames with him, we're kind of taken away from it. I was like, this could be so much better if we weren't getting these corny moments. So yeah, that's that on that. But overall, man, too much going on in the movie, unfortunately. Again, the action's fun. I think Jason Momoa was fun, and it's better than Fast 9. That's really what I can give it right now. I think there are some big ideas here with what they're doing. I actually kind of like that it's a part one, only because I feel like if you're going to do it, just do it. And I feel like they're just doing it. They're like, yeah, we're going balls to the wall here. So it's crazy that more movies are coming out. I absolutely agree with that. But also it's like, we're here in it for the long run. So they're going to do what they want to do anyway, because people are going to keep going to see these movies. So it's fine. And we'll see what happens in these future iterations.
Coming into Fast X, again, expectations for me personally were quite low just because F9 was damn near an abomination. I thought it was just not a great movie at all. I had finally felt like they jumped the shark, which is crazy to say because they really, if we're being honest, jumped the shark a lot earlier than F9. They were already doing some incredibly crazy stuff. But at least by the time we got to the Fate of the Furious, like we still had Dwayne Johnson a part of these movies. So you still had some balance between all of the stuff that they would pour into Vin Diesel, and making him really the central focal point. And you still got a little bit of that other energy from The Rock to balance it out. So if you did get some of those corny moments, as you mentioned, you might actually have some genuinely funny moments or some kick-ass moments from some other stars like The Rock or Jason Statham. And I think the Fast movies have worked as long as they have up until this point is because of the ensemble nature and because like Vin was never just like the true focal point. It was never ultimately just about him. He was certainly a central figurehead, but you had Paul Walker, you had Michelle Rodriguez, you had these other really important story elements that could just spread out all the sort of storytelling narrative across the film. But now getting into F9 and subsequently with Fast X, this has basically just become a Vin Diesel vehicle, for lack of a better term, no pun intended. And some of it's always been designed to be that. But again, at the same time, he's become a producer behind these movies. He's incredibly powerful behind the scenes, of course. He's one of the most influential social media stars that we have and one of the most recognizable movie stars. And you can just tell he's cashing in and he's using all of his cachet to make this really a Dominic Toretto driven saga. And I think that's been the downfall of these movies, where it's become him of being such the focal point of the series. And it started with the Fate of the Furious, I think, in large part, where you start to open up these ideas about him having children out there and other relatives and all this just random stuff. It's like, this feels like a soap opera, and none of that goes away for Fast X. This continues to be a huge live action, big budgeted soap opera with cars and espionage and spies and just all these random fixins that just make it this over the top blockbuster experience. And I know for a lot of people, that has been certainly an enjoyable element to these films. I think the prime era of the Fast movies was between Fast 5 and Furious 7. Like, I think that those were the absolute best years. In fact, Fast 5 and Furious 7 are my two favorites. After that, into this most recent era, we are just getting into the incredibly corny, the incredibly unrealistic, the over-the-top nature, and just leaning all the way into that. And I think that the Fast and Furious movies were a lot more fun when the producers, the filmmakers, and the actors weren't so in on the joke.
Yeah.
They were very much like still taking it somewhat serious, but now that they're totally in on the joke and everybody started talking about them going to space and doing all these weird, just unrealistic things, they're like, oh yeah, let's do that. Why not? Why not go to space? Why not take a fucking random car and strap a rocket to it and send it to outer space? And that's what we're doing now. And so Fast X is one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's better than F9, not an incredibly high bar to necessarily excel at, but it does get some points for, I think, being, relatively speaking to the rest of the franchise, a little bit more grounded. Now, by the end of it, it's not grounded at all. But for a large part of this movie, it did feel a little bit more grounded. There's much more hand-to-hand combat. I did notice the use of practical effects sort of being utilized a lot more than maybe some of the recent iterations. Don't get me wrong, there's still a ton of green screen and computer-generated effects, but I did feel like that we were focusing more on the hard hitting action and some of those more intimate set pieces as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to the fantastical stuff.
Right.
Now, this movie kind of bookends with two really fantastical sequences. You talked about the big atomic cannonball rolling through Italy, which is just like, what the hell is going on? And if you've seen the trailers, there is like a big set piece at the end with a dam that is just like, okay, we're back. We're back doing just like some incredibly crazy, just wild stuff. But in between that, you do get some more realistic action, and I think that stuff for me worked. Just kind of being able
Mm-hmm.
to lock in and focus on that. What didn't really work for me, to just like sum it up, is that there are just too many things happening. There's way too many characters in this franchise now. They are trying to cram 4 or 5 different movies into one singular cinematic experience. You have John Cena off on an adventure. You have Brie Larson showing up here. You have Jason Momoa doing his weird flamboyant Joker, Captain Jack Sparrow routine. You also have
Mm-hmm.
the Dominic Toretto aspects of it. And it's just, it becomes a lot. It becomes a lot to keep up with all of these different characters that are globetrotting and trying to find their way back to each other. And I get the sense of wanting to maybe split up the real estate so that more people can get screen time and make it a little bit more effective for their characters. But it becomes just so many different things where it's like, well, how are we going to ultimately resolve this? How are we going to make sure that organically everybody can come back to the same place at the same time? And I think by design, that's a part of the nature of this being a 2-parter or 3-parter or whatever they're trying to do. But I think it becomes overwhelming. It becomes too much. There's really no reason for Brie Larson to be in this movie. She's kind of just swapping out what we used to see from Kurt Russell, but she's just kind of here.
Mm-hmm.
Charlize Theron is still like huge actor that's a part of this franchise that's relegated somewhat to the background, but still has some importance. I think it's just juggling too many things, and maybe if they stripped it down, it could be a little bit more focused. But ultimately, if you like these movies, if you're a fan of the Fast and Furious franchise, and if you've watched them all up until this point, it's like, well, damn it, we're just kind of here to just see where they ultimately take it and see where it ends. And it might be a long crawl to the finish line just based on the plans that they've communicated to us. But I do think that the end of this is kind of egregious. The fact that they are just so
Mm-hmm.
cynical about the nature of this franchise, and they leave it where they leave it off to just make us want to come back and I guess get the emotional payoff for these characters, which is like, are we really trying to make this seem like this really emotionally resounding story about these it just felt really weird to me to end it off where they ended it off at. But
Mm-hmm.
so be it at this point. That's kind of the nature of these franchises, these big IP. What I do just want to talk about quickly, and this movie's been out for a few weeks now, so I will sort of caution people, if you haven't seen Fast X, this is sort of a spoiler warning, but this information has also been out on the internet for a while now. We actually got confirmation before the release of Fast X that Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, had indeed returned to the franchise. Now, we've known for like the past 5, maybe even 6 years that Dwayne The Rock Johnson and Vin Diesel have been at odds with each other. They have not been on the same page. They have had a
Mm-hmm.
public sort of battling and sort of different ideologies about how to approach their work. And so the last Fast and Furious movie that Dwayne Johnson was in with the rest of the cast was The Fate of the Furious back in 2017. He did the spinoff with Hobbs and Shaw, but he's been vehemently saying that he's not coming back. And the antics, I guess, on the part of Vin Diesel to try to get him back have not been things that he's necessarily been fond of. He even called it public manipulation at one point when he called Vin Diesel out on Instagram. So they've been back and forth about this whole thing. But now Dwayne The Rock Johnson is back. He's in the post-credit scene for this movie, and they absolutely tease and tee up his return in the next Fast and Furious movie. And we also got information and confirmation from him himself that he's going to be creating a spinoff movie entitled Hobbs, and that's going to come out in between Fast X Part 1 and Fast X Part 2, apparently, to set up the events of that next movie. So what I just want to ask you is, one, does that excite you, and how do you feel about it? And two, what are your overall thoughts just about the public sort of scrutiny that these two have been a part of, and the fact that, like, I guess Dwayne Johnson has had a changing of philosophies and has decided to come back to the Fast and Furious franchise?
Man, I really can't believe that, we are here. And The Rock actually was like, yeah, I guess I'll come back. I guess the apology worked. Whatever, was going on. And he was like, I guess I come. Not only that, it's just interesting that The Rock was also like failing in other things, you know what I'm saying? And it was like, I guess, I have an opportunity now, between Black Adam, between Moana, you know what I'm saying? There was other things not going so well for him. So I think eventually he was also like, okay, I guess this is something else of substance that I can tie myself to. to come back. And I think that makes sense for him, but it is interesting though to um for him to want to come back and for him to be part of this franchise that has, as you said, kind of we're off the hinges now, and that grounded nature isn't here. And so I'm curious if not he's the answer, you know what I mean, but if he can help bring some of that stuff back, because The Rock does have star power. He does. He has a certain amount of star power that really nobody else in that Fast franchise has. You know what I mean? I think people are on their way. I think Jason Momoa's on his way. Vin Diesel, of course, has some star power. You know what I mean? But The Rock is The Rock, and so I'm curious to what it looks like in the future. What these movies are going to look like for him, because I think some of the stuff they'll involve him in will be closer to some more grounded action. The Rock is not about to drive a car down a dam. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's not going to do that. But I think he is going to be part of some of those cooler spec copy things that I think are cool. Like even in this film, there's a really cool sequence with Charlize Theron close to the beginning of the film that I actually like. I was like, this is some pretty good action actually. With Charlize Theron and some things going on. I was like, okay. Now, and in my mind, I'm imagining that with The Rock, and it's like, all right, I could see this potentially being a thing if they decided to go that way. But now, is it even still Fast? Are we still talking about the Fast franchise? Where are cars involved in any of this at all now when you include The Rock? And so I don't know, man. It's a hard, I think, line to toe. So it's a hard thing to teeter, but he's back, and it is what it is. And I think it's like a we'll see when we get there what it looks like, because again, he's so different, and he makes the movie so different. Fast Five, and you watch it, The Rock has a presence in that movie. You know what I mean? It's like a whole thing in Fast Five with The Rock, and so I don't know how we're missing that for X amount of time, and we can bring that presence completely back in. Even in this movie, we do have Jason Statham, and he doesn't have the presence that I feel like he used to have in this movie. It was like, okay, it's cool to see him, and I love that he's here, but he doesn't have like the Shaws in this hole. You know what I'm saying? Like, he didn't have that. And I'm afraid we won't have that same thing with The Rock either. But we'll just have to see when we get there. So I'm okay with it. Part of it's because I'm a Rock fan and I will always want to see The Rock do whatever. But yeah, I am worried about what it will look like for him.
It's one of those weird things, because over the past about a year and a half, I would say the Rock has been wobbling. I think it hasn't been outright failures across the board for him, but he's been on a bit of a wobble with some things that have not been so successful. We have talked a lot about Black Adam and just the underperformance of that movie, and also just sort of the tepid reaction to that film. Outside of that, also, we can't forget that the XFL, which he is a part owner of, has lost a lot of money. It's not been the most successful business venture, I think, that they might have set out to necessarily make it to be. Of course, something like that is going to take years to really drive forward and get off the ground. But I don't know what his interest level is in terms of a long-term investment. And then you just start to look at and assess his other projects and like what's coming down the pipeline. And I think The Rock probably just took a look at his schedule and said, like, oh, this is kind of looking a little light. Where are those Red Notice sequels that are supposed to come out? Which I'm not looking for that stuff, because Red Notice was awful. But he's also not talking about the Jumanji franchise, like if they're going to do another one, or some other projects. I'm just kind of curious as to what his overall sort of next year looks like, and he probably was just starting to assess the same thing and said, like, this might be the time to go ahead and pull the trigger and to come back to the franchise that really made me become like a megastar in Hollywood. And I think that it's a smart business move. I don't blame anybody for that at all. And ultimately, I do think that this will result in perhaps a better film going experience and a fan experience for this franchise, because you want to see him be a part of these films. But at the same time as well, I remember being in Florida like a few days after, and I went to Universal, and they have like the big marquee, the poster, the character posters of this franchise with all the characters. And I was just sitting there looking at it, and I'm like, Jesus Christmas, that's a lot of people a part of this franchise. Like, you have Charlize Theron, you have Michelle Rodriguez, you have Vin Diesel, so on and so forth. And now you've added Jason Momoa and just all these people. And then you add The Rock on top of that. And then also some other stars who look like they're going to be returning for these next few installments. It's just like, where is there room going to be for any of these people? Like, we're going to have to start playing around with the idea of a 3-hour movie, which Please no. I don't want a 3 hour Fast and Furious movie. Like I'm good on that. Like let's keep
Yeah.
it 210, 215 max, really.
Mhm.
But I just wonder about the real estate, and maybe this Hop spinoff can help with that to start to bridge that gap between this one and the next one. But of course, The Rock is going to get his own solo spinoff. Of course, he's going to negotiate that in
Right.
terms of his return. He's always going to make sure that he's looking out for number one. Again, don't blame him at all for that. But this idea that the Fast and Furious franchise is ending anytime soon, go ahead and throw that out the window. It's not, because you have that movie, you have another Fast X Part 2, I guess, and also Vin Diesel was playing around and toying around with the idea that they're going to make it a 3-parter. Now, I don't know if
Jesus.
that includes the Rock movie or not. Like maybe
Mhm.
that was like the idea, or if that's like still a separate concept. But we're talking about at least another 6 to 7 years of these movies. Like it's going to be around, y'all. So buckle up, for lack of a better term, and get ready. Like they're not going anywhere. But with all of that being said, folks, those are our thoughts on Fast X. If you've checked out this movie, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think about it.